Welcome, welcome. Feel free to introduce yourself in the chat, where you come from. If you're a student at SBH or from the community, happy to have you here, and we'll just get started in a minute or two. Hi, folks. Welcome to those just joining. We'll get started in a minute. Feel free to introduce yourself in the chat, where you come from. Nice to have you here tonight. All right, we'll go ahead and get started. Hi, everyone. My name is Alexis Grant. I'm a doctoral student in community health sciences here at the UIC School of Public Health and one of the co-instructors for the course Epidemics of Injustice, along with Ms. Washika Torres. This week, we are happy to have some wonderful panelists to present on the topic of art for advocacy. So again, feel free to introduce yourself in the chat. And while our presenters are speaking, feel free to drop any comments or questions in the chat, and we'll have some time for questions at the end. So just a little overview of the course for folks who maybe haven't been attending week to week. This is an annual course, free and open to the public, that prepares public health leaders and community members with the tools to bring about social change and address the structural determinants of health. This year, our theme is Resistance, Rebellion, and Revolution through Public Health, which was brainstormed by a group of students here at the School of Public Health. So we're really excited to keep continuing on with this course, as sponsored by the Collaboratory for Health Justice. And before we get started, I just wanted to put our land acknowledgement up here, acknowledging that if you're in Chicago, these are the original homelands of the Three Fires peoples that was taken from them through colonization. And I encourage you to read more about this using the LibGuide available on the UIC website. So last week we talked about policy and action, and we heard from two folks from the Chicago Food Policy Action Council. And throughout the weeks, in every single course, we've had this theme of action and advocacy, and we've been learning from different activists and scholars about the methods that they use, as well as the different topics that they do their advocacy work around. So I'm really excited to kind of continue these themes this week as we talk about art for advocacy. We have three wonderful folks from Disability and Human Development department here at UIC that do amazing various types of art for advocacy that we'll hear about today. And with that, I will turn it over to my co-instructor to introduce our speakers. Ms. Torres. Okay, she might be having some issues, so I'll go ahead and introduce our speakers. So with us today, we have Dr. Carrie Sondal, who's a faculty member in Disability and Human Development here at UIC. She's an associate professor, and she directs Chicago's Bodies of Work, an organization that supports the development of disability arts and culture through festivals, advocacy, and an artist residency program. Her research and creative activity focus on disability identity in live performance and film. Sondal's publications include a co-authored anthology, Bodies in Commotion, Disability and Performance, which garnered the Association for Theater and Higher Education's Award for Outstanding Book in Theater Practice and Pedagogy. Sandal frequently travels nationally and internationally to speak about her research and arts advocacy initiatives. She collaborated on a documentary, Code of the Freaks, a critique of disability representations in cinema, which premiered in 2020. We also have with us Maggie Bridger, who is a disability studies PhD student. She's a graduate student of the University of Illinois at Chicago in the Department of Disability and Human Development, and a dance artist working in disability dance. Her research and artistic interests center around disabled body, minds, and dance, with a focus on reimagining pain through the creative process. Maggie is a co-founder of the Inclusive Dance Workshop series at Access Living. She was part of the inaugural cohort of the Dancing Disability Lab at UCLA, serves on the committee to organize Chicago's Integrated Dance Concert Counterbalance, and was recently named one of Synapse Arts 2021 New Works Program recipients. And lastly, we also have Sydney Ehrlich with us, who is a doctoral candidate in disability studies. She studies dance and disability, focusing on dance groups that include individuals with intellectual disabilities. She was awarded a Schweitzer Fellowship with her partner, which led to the creation of Inclusive Dance Workshop series at Access Living in Chicago. So we are very excited to hear about the work that you do. And with that, I will turn it over to our panel.
All right. Hello, everybody. It's so good to see you. I see people's names. I see some faces. I recognize a few people. So I am here to talk about the film Code of the Freaks and kind of put it in the context of arts advocacy for you. I'm going to share my screen here. Let's see, is that okay?
Yes, we see the entire window. Perfect, great.
Thank you. So Code of the Freaks was a team effort. We really worked as a collaborative. So I want to make sure to give my team members credit. Salome Chasnoff, who is our director and producer. Susan Nussbaum, another writer and producer. Allison Petsavis, writer and producer. Jersey Rose, editor and producer. And me, writer and producer. On the screen is an image of the poster for our film, and there are screenshots of the different interviewees, and the text reads, "Offend one and you offend them all." The story, and then the title of the film, Code of the Freaks, the story of Hollywood's exploitation of disability. So what I want to share with you today is just an introduction to the overall project, because Code of the Freaks was really the culmination of a much longer arts advocacy project, and it's still ongoing. Then I'm going to talk about the concept and the framework, how we decided to put the film together the way we did, and how we decided to, what was the underall concept of the whole thing? Like, what was the one thing we wanted audiences to take away, and why we chose to put the materials together in the way that we did. And then finally, I want to talk with you about the film in context and how some issues are related to the film, and if you were wanting to use it to teach or to share with others or to lead community workshops with, some of the issues that you might want to discuss in relation to the film. All right, so to introduce the project, I teach a large lecture course, now online of course, called Disability in American Film. And Sydney and Maggie also are my TAs and have been very integral to the current curriculum and really important partners in teaching. It's a large gen ed class, so we are pitching our material to general audiences. So students from all over campus take our class, and we want to make the work as relevant and accessible as possible. So while we're focusing on film, we really want to make sure that we are raising issues that will be valuable to the students no matter where they are, what context they find themselves in. So we're teaching about how film makes meaning, but at the same time, we're teaching how that meaning making process is related to larger social issues related to disability. The film process started, gosh, I think it was 2008, with Susan Nussbaum and Salome Chasnov. Susan is a novelist and a playwright who worked at Access Living, which is Chicago's Center for Independent Living, which does advocacy work and support for people with disabilities with a focus on community living. Susan worked a lot in putting on programs for the folks who were connected with Access Living. And Salome is a feminist director who had an organization called Beyond Media, and she works on various media literacy projects. So Susan and Salome had actually worked together twice before with a group of girls called the Empowered Fifis. Fifi's short for females, and this was a support group at Access Living for teen girls with disabilities, mostly girls of color. And they did two videos. One was more like a disability awareness video, and the other one was about disability and sexuality and issues related to that for these girls. And part of what they did was really put the hands of the film, put the materials of the filmmaking process in the hands of the girls who participated. So they were teaching the girls filmmaking techniques, the girls conducted on the street interviews. But that background I share with you because it's really, I think, helps to give a sense of how this film is really centered in disability experience, disability community, and in providing an understanding of how media creates meaning. And while they were working with the girls, our project was more like giving the wider audience a potential critical perspective and information that they could use. So they teamed up in 2008, and Susan held what she called a salon. And this was the first event that eventually led to Code of the Freaks. And what they did was they pulled together some movie clips about, on various topics, and they showed them to an audience at Access Living, and people then gave their thought about how these films related to one another, what it meant to their lives. And it was such a huge success. They did them more times. And then they thought, hey, there's so much interest in this. This would be a great documentary in and of itself. And then I moved to Chicago in 2009 to join the faculty. And my background is theater and performance. And as Alexis said, I'm a disability in theater scholar and artist. So I was going to be teaching this class. So we met for lunch, and they suggested that maybe I would like to join them on the team. Then Allison Patsavis, who's also interviewed in the film, at the time we started, she was one of my graduate students and TAs for the class. And she joined the team first as a graduate assistant. And then through the process of making the film, she became a full collaborator. I give you some of that context so that you can see how from the beginning, the film was always related to kind of not only a kind of consciousness raising, community building, but also involving a lot of the university community and then the wider community, the disability community, but also others. So we had a long research phase for this film, and we received several grants where we hosted these salons for different communities around the city of Chicago. And we did a ton of research. We watched a whole lot of films, and we did sort of a literature review, and we ended up editing about a half hour's worth of clips around different themes. And some of these themes ended up in the movie that you watched. And we gathered footage. We recorded, video recorded them. We made a short version of Code of the Freaks that focused on these salons. But our goal was to get as many voices involved as possible. So we met not only at the Centers for Independent Living, but we met in churches in numerous neighborhoods. We met in arts spaces like Victory Gardens Theater. We met, we even did a couple sessions for children and animated films that didn't end up in the final movie. But we were trying out these ideas. And one of the things that we learned was that our community had a lot of different ideas, and what seemed to be most important to people was how these films related to people's lived experience. And it was really interesting to see the diversity of ideas and thoughts and feelings about the film. And so we knew that whatever form our film would take, we wanted to make sure that it was knowledge coming from the community itself. All of our interviewees identify as disabled. They come from different, different areas of our community. And we wanted to make sure that we also included some commentary that conflicted with each other. So you'll notice our points in the film where we are disagreeing, where we have different ideas, and we wanted to make sure that was present in the film so that people didn't think that there was just one perspective. I don't know if you all noticed, but the way that the film is edited, I kind of come across as what I call the disability wet blanket. No matter what anybody says, I swoop in and say the opposite. And part of that was because I think we were trying to show different perspectives. So I was often recruited to give a counter opinion. So I was like, man, I watched the movie. I'm like, man, I'm just obnoxious. But I think that's kind of funny. I think it really goes to show how much meaning is made in the editing process. So I'm not as much of a wet blanket in real life. I know you can ask Sydney and Maggie and ask them if that's true. We wanted to make this a disability culture community response. Maggie and Sydney will be talking more about disability culture. But in general, we wanted to make sure that that even though we ended up using the talking head format, which is individual interviews framed from the waist up, that we wanted to create a sense of community. A lot of our final choices about doing those individual interviews rather than the salons had to do with budget and technical issues more than anything else. So we decided that we would try to at least maintain a sense of community. But we wanted people to respond to these representations and to give audiences a sense that, movies are not just movies. Movies affect how people understand themselves as disabled people and how other people understand disability and the ramifications for that in people's lived experience and in larger social issues. So that's what we ended up trying to capture different members of the disability culture community. We focused primarily on artists and activists and academics. And we also have more so general audience type responses. So we're coming from different perspectives. We had applied for grants. We got a couple small grants. UIC, startup money when I joined the faculty helped funded the film. But in the end, we used crowdsourcing as a campaign to complete the film. We had done a lot of speaking about the project and showing some of the footage and early versions to audiences around the country and even in a few international venues. But we had difficulty convincing funders to give us a substantial sum of money to finish the film. And it was interesting the reasons that they gave us. One reason we heard over and over again is that we were too negative, that we didn't present alternatives, that we weren't offering solutions to the problem, that we were too political. And we thought, those were kind of interesting. We felt like, well, it's not really our community's responsibility to point out the whole structure of how these films are created and how they affect us. It's not also our responsibility to fix all the problems. Like, our offering is to the general audiences and to artists and activists, that now that we have kind of laid out what the issues are and where the meaning making primarily lies, now, you know, you take up that knowledge and do something with it. It's a handing off. It's a at one point early on, we had thought about including films and art by people with disabilities that showed an alternative, but we decided that we couldn't do all of that in one film, and hopefully we'll have another film someday that is more focused on work coming from the disability community, such as the stuff that Maggie and Sydney will be sharing with you today. So in the end, we did 13 interviews across activists, artists, and scholars. So the concept and framework. Clearly, the film addresses stereotyping, and this was important to us. But, you know, once you point out the stereotypes, it's kind of reductive to just say stereotypes are bad. You know, we wanted to explore the stereotypes and try to get a sense of how they repeat, what meanings they created. And we tried not to stop just at the calling out of stereotypes. This information was available in other places. So what we instead tried to do was talk about how these stereotypes work as a narrative device. And by that we mean, how does film use disability to further a narrative, to create a narrative? And, you know, it's something that scholars such as David Mitchell, Sharon Snyder, and others that I could give you some information about sources that you, if you're interested, I can send to your instructors, but that disability does not appear in movies or television commercials, uh, television itself. It doesn't appear unless it is used in the plot as a device. So when you see a person with a disability on screen, it immediately calls up what happened to that person, or you know, why does that person have a disability? Characters don't just have disabilities. It ends up being in some way significant to the narrative. And this has huge ramifications for keeping people with disabilities kind of constrained in certain types of roles. And the plots all end up being the same movie. This was the insight that we had. This was what we wanted people to take away, that it didn't matter if we had, you know, if it was a film about euthanizing characters or about, you know, an inspirational overcomer. And if you really dig down, all of them had the same purpose of inspiring audiences who were assumed to be non-disabled. That the idea is that they're created for an audience that they assume to be non-disabled, to inspire them to be better people. And sometimes you see that process happening in the movies. You'll have a character that we started calling the non-disabled guide, who tells audiences how to look at that character and then has some sort of epiphany that they could be better people because they learn a valuable lesson about life, love. So really, that's the purpose that disabled characters tend to serve. And there are not very many examples in Hollywood that stray from this formula. So we tried to capture the various responses to these films, as I mentioned before, and showcasing the community's voice. There are a couple other films that explore this territory. There's one called Cinemabilities, if you wanted to watch another take on the same material. It's interesting though, that film focuses primarily on non-disabled actors who have played disabled characters speaking on behalf of the disability community. So if you want a kind of a counterpoint narrative strategy to how a documentary can be made, that is an interesting one. I think that one is available for rent on streaming services as well. So we wanted to make sure the focus was on our community. So in context, the way that the film, might be used if you were wanting to show it in a community setting or have discussions around it, teach it in a class, is that the first thing it kind of does is it captures what these persistent stereotypes are and demonstrates how they have not really changed over the decade of our project, but also since the advent of film. And in my own class, what this has allowed me to do as an instructor is lay out that whole argument in the first day. And then I can get into what I think is more interesting material about how disabled people are creating alternatives. So it's that message about what all the stereotypes are, how they tend to affect disabled people, we can get out of the way in 90 minutes. And so it's a way that you can kind of get people on the same page or have a shared narrative to respond to. And then, it kind of frees people up to explore other ideas. We were kind of like, we want to talk about other things. We made the movie about this topic, but we actually want to talk about something else. We also did want to highlight that there's a lot of celebrations about disabled people's progress. And we, especially since the Americans with Disabilities Act was reaching the 25-year anniversary, a 30-year anniversary, how even though some things had changed socially, that this progress narrative needed to be tempered by how people were actually experiencing their realities and how that related to these films, which at the heart have not really changed all that much. We wanted to increase the visibility of disabled people, and we wanted to have ongoing conversation about disabled actors for disabled roles, about casting disabled actors training. So we're hoping that it spurs those kind of conversations. We also wanted to begin the conversation of the intersection of racism and ableism, in particular, to highlight the disparities of progress. We was our goal to take an intersectional approach, but what we found distressing was that most films about disability feature white disabled wheelchair using men. Can be men or women, but they're very overrepresented in film. And if there were disabled characters of color, they tended to be Black disabled men, which is something we go to in depth in the film. We looked and looked and looked for other patterns. We found like almost no representation of Asian American, Latinx communities, any non-white or non-African American male characters. Then we were like, well, where are the Black women characters with disabilities in these films? And they did appear occasionally, but almost always with a diagnosis of mental illness or as people with substance issues, like alcoholism or drug use. And that was interesting to think about why is that? I think that needs a lot more digging and thinking about, why this one fixation on the Black disabled male. Something that has come up a lot since the film has been touring in festivals online now, because it came out last year at this time, like almost exactly a year ago, is that people have kind of latched on to the issues about whose lives are valued, whose lives are worth living, because the cultural context we're in now has brought up issues of medical rationing during this time of COVID, about triage, about, what does it mean to have herd immunity? Which people are we willing to sacrifice so that the the herd? Who is the herd too? Like who is assumed to be the herd? All those kind of questions keep coming up in conversations, and you can use the film as a means to bring up these issues if you would like. I've also shown the film a number of times to medical students or practitioners, and it's interesting to talk with them about how a lot of these tropes end up working their way into interactions in medical settings, like between doctors and patients. How we can see, some of the lines that you might hear in these movies showing up in doctor-patient encounters, for instance. Let me check how I'm doing on time. I'm doing pretty well. I think I have time to give you one anecdote that can illuminate this. When I began talking today, I did not describe myself. I just kind of skipped right into the conversation today, so I apologize. I'm a white woman with blondish brownish hair. It's pulled back, and I'm wearing glasses and a black top, and behind me is one of those backgrounds, virtual backgrounds of UIC, a view from UIC skyline. What you can't see right now is that I have an apparent physical disability. So I'm short stature, and I either am using crutches or a wheelchair. And so when I enter a space, people know, if you have access to that visual information, that I have a disability. So that gives you a sense of maybe part of my own lived experience that might be informing the topic. But it's interesting in these online events, I realize how much I rely on that. That now I have to actually really tell you kind of what that visual information might impart. But so I tell the story about when I was about, I think I was 22 or 23. I went to see an orthopedic surgeon for some hip pain. And the doctor was explaining to me what my surgical options were. And the way that he explained the situation to me about the choices I had. And remember, I was very young and I didn't know really any other disabled people. I had no context for this information. Even though I was disabled from birth, I wasn't yet part of a community. The doctor told me that if I didn't have this surgery, which was incredibly invasive and one that is very rarely performed, so it was like a huge deal, but that if I didn't have the surgery, that by the time I was 40, I would be in a wheelchair. Like it was presented to me as this doom and gloom scenario, like it would be the worst possible thing you could think of. So I did have the surgery, and interestingly enough, after that surgery, I was never able to walk like more than just like around my house without crutches or a wheelchair. It's like the surgery itself made my impairment much more impairing. So that's interesting. But when I was 40 years old, exactly in my 40th year, was when I got my first wheelchair. So like the thing the doctor had predicted, like to scare me, ended up being the thing that happened. But what also happened was it was the best thing I think that had ever happened to me. I had so much more stamina because I was less exhausted from trying to walk around on crutches. I was able to go to museums and go shopping with my daughter without the pain that normally would keep those opportunities very limited. I started traveling again. I've been to Europe and many places in Europe and Asia, and traveling to different parts of the US because I have the wheelchair. If I had had that wheelchair when I was 20, I feel like my life would have been very different. So all that is to say that when you watch these movies and you hear like assistive devices being presented as and being symbols of failure, of doom and gloom as the worst thing that can happen to you, it prevents this kind of information that could really be enhancing to disabled people's lives. I didn't know anyone who used a wheelchair. They could have introduced me to people who used wheelchairs so that I had more information. So this is the kind of thing, you know, if you haven't watched the film yet and you are watching it, think about how all these ideas work their way into really important interactions we have as individuals and society. And finally, moving out of that personal anecdote, we consider the film itself as a contribution to disability culture. And disability culture is the community that is intentionally being built by disabled people to bring us together, to explore our shared experiences, to fight for access and justice. And so that this film is in itself a piece of art that contributes to that. So we tried in many different ways to make it a kind of alternative format. One of the things we did is not have a single disabled person. We went to some producers early on, very well-known documentary filmmaking company, and showed them our stuff, you know, asked them if they were interested in supporting the film. And they said they would support it if we turned it into a journey narrative. So if the camera could follow one disabled person kind of meeting other disabled people, learning about the topic. And we're like, but this is what movies do. They individualize, and it's like, we don't want to be like a source of discovery. We want to be the experts. We want to be a community of experts. But even that, I mean, it seems like that shouldn't be that, you know, startling. It was, and that company that we could have really benefited from working with, we ended up feeling like we didn't want to compromise our own vision. So that is what I have for you today. Thank you for letting me share all that with you. And I have seen some of your questions that came up earlier. We're going to save those until after Maggie and Sydney present. And I see some things came up in the chat, but we'll address those after Maggie and Sydney. So.
I'm putting the questions in a Word doc so that we can have them documented.
Okay, because when I was presenting my screen, I couldn't see any of the questions, because when you share your screen, they kind of go away. So we'll pick this up again in relation to Maggie and Sydney. So thank you. I'm going to pass it on. I'm going to turn off my camera and have some water. I'm not like fleeing. I'm just taking a break.
Amazing. All right, I'm going to share my screen, my little presentation. Can everybody see that?
Yes, looks good.
Thank you. All right. Hello, y'all. My name is Maggie Bridger, and I use she, her pronouns, and I am a fat white lady with very short brown hair and very red lipstick, as well as a sort of black and white stripy dress and a red cardigan sitting in my like makeshift office in our spare bedroom. Sydney, you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah. Hi, my name is Sydney Ehrlich. My pronouns are she, her, hers. And I am a white woman. I'm also sitting in my makeshift office / spare bedroom. And I'm wearing glasses, and I have the opposite of Maggie, pandemically long hair that I braid up on my hair and pin it up every day so it's out of the way. And I'm also wearing like a striped black and white sweater, but I promise that Carrie, Maggie, and I did not coordinate our outfits. It's just what happened today. And we're
All right. Go ahead, Sydney, sorry.
No problem. So today we're going to first invite you to join us in a brain dance. I know that we've been together all already for about 40 minutes, and I think that sometimes getting moving a little bit can help us recenter ourselves and think about new material. And then we'll dive into a little bit more about our workshops that you heard about. And then, as Carrie said, we will go over what is disability culture. And then we will also look into the ways that we measure the development of disability culture. And then Maggie will go into disability aesthetics, and we'll talk a little bit more about disability culture in relation to our community.
Very cool. So I'm going to stop sharing while we do our brain dance. And we like to do this as kind of a, it's really hard to talk about a dance workshop without letting you experience some of it. So we want to sort of give you this opportunity to sort of experience what we do with our community. And a thing that we always say to the folks that join us in our dance workshops is that you're welcome to use this space however you like. If you want to like literally just use this time to lay on a floor and listen to me talk, you are welcome to do that. If you want to fully engage in all of the prompts I'm offering you, you are also welcome to do that. Sydney is going to kind of demonstrate for us so you can see her, most of her body, and we'll get going. So we're going to begin by just looking away from your screen for a moment. You can find a spot to look, like one particular spot to focus on. If that's helpful for you, you can close your eyes, whatever feels useful. And we're just going to notice our breath. Just take some nice breaths in and out. And when you're ready, I want to offer just some communal breaths. Let's just breathe together for a couple of times. So we're going to take a nice deep breath in and out. In and out. And now we're going to move into the phase of the brain dance called tactile. And this is where we sort of give a little attention to the surfaces of our bodies. So you can do that by sort of tapping or rubbing, just sort of paying attention to those surfaces of your body. You could swipe. We're just sort of waking up our skin. Yeah, totally. You can do top of your head, behind your ears is a good one that feels nice. Back of your neck, shoulders. And if using your hands isn't accessible to you, you're welcome to sort of, if you're sitting on a chair, to use the chair to kind of rub against. If you can't bend all the way down to your legs, you're welcome to use your like feet or whatever else you have available to you. Beautiful. Nice. And when you're ready, we're going to move into a phase called core distal. So all that means is we're going to make really small shapes or positions with our body. And then we're going to expand into really large shapes. And that can be however you'd like. So that could be just like with a single body part, a hand, a finger, an eyeball, your toes, your mouth, absolutely. Or it could be with your whole body. You could do a full curl all the way in and stretch all the way out. We're really just trying to find the limits of our sort of spatial access here in whatever way feels comfortable and useful for you right now. Nice. Just a couple more moments in and out. And as you're doing it just the last couple of times, I want to challenge you to make an even smaller shape than what you've already made and expand that into an even larger shape than what you've been able to do. Again, for whatever works for your body in this moment. Beautiful. And we're gonna move on. We're moving at a fast clip. We're gonna move on to head tail. So we're gonna find the very top of our head, and Sydney is gonna help us with this one. You're gonna find the very top of your head and the bottom of your spine, just above your posterior. And you're going to make a long curve between those two spaces with our back. All right, so you're gonna find a long curve with the spine, sort of a softening and hollowing out of the front of your body. And come back to whatever neutral looks like for you. And we're going to reverse that. So we're going to go into a big arch. So your back is going to arch, and you're really going to find an openness in those shoulders. Really opening your chest up. And move between, I'm gonna invite you to move between those two shapes for just a moment, sort of finding that mobility. It's a lot like cat-cow if you're a yoga person. So you're just finding that long mobility in the spine, not crushing the spine, really thinking of lengthening as you curve and arch. Curve and arch, just on your own time. Beautiful. And when you're ready, we're going to move into upper and lower. So you're going to find, for this one, we're going to sort of draw a line across the center of our body, the horizontal center. And we're going to find a nice, strong stability in our lower body. So from about your hips down, and we're going to mobilize the upper body. And that can look like a lot of different things. That could look like just turning your head one way or the other way. Could look like a nice shoulder roll. We're really just focusing on sensation and exploring. You could revisit some of the pathways we've already found. You could revisit tactile if that feels good to you. You can keep curving and arching in different ways. Just really finding some nice stability in our lower body and contrasting that with mobility in the upper body. And when you're ready, we're going to move into where we're going to now find that same stillness and stability in our upper body that we just had in our lower body. And we're going to begin mobilizing that lower body. Again, it's totally great to do this however feels comfortable and good for you today. You're welcome to use your hands to support that movement if that's useful to you. You're welcome to just kind of wiggle your toes and bend your knees, whatever movement is accessible to you on the lower body. You could pay more attention to your hips if you like. You could just do a nice little swing with your lower legs if you have short legs like me that don't always touch the floor.
What daddy? Sorry.
Marty wants to dance too. Just a couple more moments with the lower body. And then we're going to move into body side. We have just a couple left. We're almost done. So we're going to draw a nice long line down the center of our body. So instead of going horizontally, now we're going to go vertically up and down. And we're going to find stillness and stability on one side, and we're going to really mobilize the other side. So that could look like moving your arm or your leg, fingers, toes, elbow, knee. It could also look like moving a piece of your body that's sort of closer to that center line, maybe a shoulder. Or could you move just one hip, just one eyeball or ear? My mom can move her ears. I can't do that. I'm not that talented. Nice. And we're going to find stillness and stability on that side and move on to the other side. So we're really finding whatever mobility is exciting or interesting or comforting to you right now. Just exploring. Beautiful. All right. And when you're ready, we're going to move into cross lateral. So this just means we're going to cross that center line we just drew down the middle of our body. And that can, again, as with all of these things, can look like many different things. That could look like crossing your eyes. That could look like just sort of poking a finger over that middle line. Yeah, that could look like crossing legs, arms. Hug. Hug is a nice one. Yeah, and you could cross above or below your sort of torso. You can cross behind yourself. Sometimes that feels really nice on a back. All right. We're going to move into our last section. And this one is always optional. It's called vestibular. So what we're essentially going to do is make ourselves just a little bit dizzy. And then bounce it out to sort of find our center again. So the way we'll do that is we'll again find a place to look in the room, and you'll shake your head back and forth. Shake, 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 and stop. Look at that place you found earlier. Ooh, feel a little bit dizzy, and just bounce it out. Sort of let your body find its center again. Let's do that one more time. So we're going to shake, 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 shake. Stop. Woo, dizzy, dizzy. And bounce it out. Beautiful. And let's just take one more big communal breath together as we finish this up. Just deep breath in and out. Beautiful. All right. Thank you for moving with us for a moment. All righty, I'm going to share my slides again. All right. So we are going to talk a little bit today about our inclusive dance workshops at Access Living. On this slide, I'm just going to quickly describe the image that we have up. It's a group of about 13 people of different ages, genders, races, and embodiments/environments are grouped together in a large room with dark green carpet and light purple walls. The group is dancing together. Some people seem to be reaching out, others are twisting their bodies. Some crouch down on the floor and others move through the space. So a little more info about our workshops. Our first workshops happened in August 2019, and they're run out of Access Living, which, as Carrie mentioned, is Chicago's Center for Independent Living. The workshops are inclusive, is the word we use to describe them. That means for us that dancers with and without disabilities are welcome to attend. So the way we sort of phrase that is that all bodies and minds are welcome in the space. Though we intentionally build the space to center disabled body minds and disability experiences. The project was funded through the Albert Schweitzer Foundation Fellowship, which Sydney and I are co-recipients of, or were now. And now we're currently operating under a Schweitzer Foundation seed grant. Our project was geared towards the disability geared towards the disability community, facilitating workshops for children, teens, and adults with disabilities in the Chicagoland area, as well as their families and caregivers. According to the ADA 2025 report released in 2012, there are about 292,332 disabled people in the city of Chicago, and Access Living serves about 1,834 disabled people per year, according to their 2019 annual report. According to the 2012 Illinois Disability Status Report, the median annual income of a person with a disability is about $21,000. The ADA Park Project found that in the city of Chicago, 31.5% of people living below the poverty line, and only 21.6% of people with disabilities work full-time. Due to these factors, people with disabilities face health disparities due to numerous social, economic, and environmental determinants of health. This project has reached over 300 participants in the Chicago area. We were able to create connections between Access Living and the Chicago Disability and other organizations in the community. Our average weekly classes have about 13 attendees. And after the fall workshops, about 83% of participants said they would feel comfortable taking dance classes beyond just our workshops, and 66% said that they feel a part of a disability community. Just some numbers to throw at you really quickly.
So Maggie's going to quickly show you a video that a Northwestern University grad student, Esther Bowen, came and made this little feature.
For most dancers,
I just love dance.
movement is more natural than words.
Words are very limiting, but body language and dance is actually a more accurate way to communicate with people.
Leading UIC students Maggie Bridger and Sydney Ehrlich to create a dance community for any and all abilities.
There isn't that much community arts kind of stuff for adults happening. So we wanted to sort of fill that gap as much as possible.
Filling that gap with weekly dance classes centered around body awareness, improvisation, and creating dance, bringing two groups of people together.
I just think disability has some really freaking cool stuff to offer dance and vice versa.
And Susan Riley can't get enough.
I just really enjoy it. It's my highlight. It's one of the highlights of my week. So coming to dance, and it makes me very happy.
Now, the dance that's going on behind me was all made possible because of a fellowship that promotes healthy living. That's what's allowed this community of dancers to dance.
We just want a community to come together and share space and work through what dance might be together.
Opening the doors of dance to more people and giving them a space to shine.
I often get nervous, just talking to people, but when I'm stage, I'm as calm as a cucumber. I'm supposed to be on stage.
And I feel like I can handle just about anything.
And anything can be for anyone. In River North, Esther Bauer, Medill reports. For most.
Awesome, thanks, Maggie. So what is disability culture? The disability performance scholar Petra Kuppers and Melanie Wakefield provide a thorough definition and history of disability culture in the Encyclopedia of American Disability History. First, explaining that disability culture emerged in the 1960s and 70s as disabled people were slowly allowed to engage more in public life due to the institutionalization and changing cultural attitudes around disability. Kuppers and Wakefield claim that from these early days, arts played an important role in disabled people's ability to articulate and build their own culture. They argue that disability culture often revels in those behaviors that mainstream culture deems unseemly or impolite, such as moving in crip time, making noise, and moving in ways that would appear odd in mainstream culture. And generally prioritizing and affirming bodily and sensory needs. It is exactly this kind of shifting and emerging culture that we are interested in with this work, particularly as it relates to the aesthetics of disability and disability arts. And so I have a nice quote here that I'd like to share by the professor emeritus, actually from UIC, the disability studies scholar, Carol Gill. And Dr. Gill claims that as disabled people, we are reminded every day that our minds and bodies move in opposition to the expectations of our home cultures. No wonder we feel pressured to drop our differences at the door. But relinquishing our differences fragments our sense of self and crushes our spirit. It's never good for one's creative drive to exist in partial form. Disability culture supports our right to resist fragmentation and reclaim lost parts. Whether the disabled artists openly address disability as theme in their art or not, having access to their wholeness radiates energy into the world of art. And so from this, we see this as who is part of disability culture, which is primarily based on Petra Kupper's work. So it includes people with disabilities and their non-disabled allies, and those who do not yet identify as disabled. And that's really important, right? Because there's a spectrum of disability. And so that's what's important about Kupper's definition here. And also that disability of culture has a spectrum of attitudes, right? So the lived experience of disability is varied. And so there's a spectrum of attitudes that I think you see in Dr. Sandal's video, Code of the Freaks, as she presented earlier. That's a good example. And then disability culture is the difference in being alone, isolated, and individuated with a physical, cognitive, emotional, or sensory difference that in our society invited discrimination and reinforces that isolation. It's the difference between all that and being in the community. So that's really what Maggie and I are trying to do with our project at Access Living.
Beautiful. So I want to talk a little bit about how we're sort of measuring this development of disability culture in our community. So the workshops are not only designed to be accessible to every body mind that enters the space, but more importantly, they take disability culture and the lived experience of disabled body minds as the baseline from which to build a dance community. Though the workshops are open to all body minds, both disabled and non-disabled, they are intentionally positioned as emerging through and with disability culture. The goal of this explicit positioning is that the community is given the time and space to work through what disability dance is or might be in an environment where the disabled dancing body does not necessarily exist in relationship to the idealized dancing body, but is instead assumed the assumed baseline upon which dance is built. One of the primary objectives of these workshops was to build a space that centered disability culture and the disability experience as a valuable platform from which to build community and art. While most dance spaces remain inaccessible and unwelcoming to diverse bodies and experiences, our classes took that diversity as a necessary and exciting opportunity to create dance and build strong relationships. The impact of this centering of the disability experience can be observed in a moment from one of our workshops early on in the project. One of our dancers expressed that they were nervous to go back to their, quote, regular dance classes after having experienced a workshop where their own movement was centered. We talked a little bit about how affirming disability-centered spaces are and how it can be hard to leave them and go back into the rest of the world. Again, sort of reflecting this idea of having to leave parts of yourself at the door. We never strive for that in our space. We strive to undo that in our space. And this moment felt like a really wonderful time where the dancer felt comfortable enough to share some of their anxieties about their work and the outside dance world. And then that provided us an opportunity to sort of affirm and work through those feelings as a community. Additionally, oh no, sorry. So we also work in an intentionally cross-disability space, recognizing that sometimes this means that our access needs conflict with one another. So cross-disability meaning that we're working across various types of impairment. So intellectual disability, non-apparent disability, chronic illness, physical disability. We have all of these different experiences present in our workshops. In this so that results in access conflicts. In this conflict, though, this is the opportunity to practice collective access, to work together to ensure that everyone gets what they need out of our time together. This practice inherently changes the aesthetic and values of the work we create together. So I want to talk just a little bit about disability aesthetics, which are really what our workshops sort of strive to generate together or figure out together. And I want to begin with this really beautiful quote from Alice Shepard's Intersectional Disability Arts Manifesto. She writes, "I am driven to create art that connects to the beautiful, complicated histories and cultures of disability, race, gender, and sexuality. I do not work in a vacuum. I am part of a complicated, contentious, exciting community. I want my work to continue our conversations, honor our pasts, and open a vista to our futures." So in this Intersectional Disability Arts Manifesto, disabled dance artist Alice Shepard articulates disability aesthetics as necessarily emerging from disability culture, but expands upon that what that means in practice. For Shepard, disability itself is, quote, an aesthetic, a series of intersecting cultures and a creative force. End quote. Disability aesthetic does not exist to explain impairment or disability oppression to a mainstream audience, but instead is made for and by disabled people. It is art that disabled people can recognize themselves and their own experience in, and as such must necessarily grapple with the multiple categories of identity embodied within this community. In this project, we are particularly interested in the formation of disability aesthetics and how they are made legible in our community. Beautiful.
Thanks, Maggie. So I know the topic of today is art as advocacy. And so is this art as advocacy is kind of, the question that I'd like to approach now. So I'm coming from the idea that art is a vehicle for social change. So I want to be clear that this is a community project. Currently, Maggie and I are not actively writing our dissertations on our work with this community. We are active members of the National Disability and Dance community, and we created this project based on a need we perceived in the disability and dance community in Chicago. We have presented on pedagogical processes that we practice in the community at education conferences and dance conferences. We also will be sharing our recent dance film and process at upcoming disability conferences with the national community. But we are not currently using this as art-based methods for our dissertation. But this can still be art as advocacy. I want to preface that this is a different thing than art advocacy, which is often discussed in the dance community as advocacy for the arts, which I do think we are doing through our community and work and our performance, especially art advocacy for people with disabilities. To me, I often think of art as advocacy as being a single piece of work made from the disability community, like some of the work that we shared by Students Invalid in those who had the reading and the homework for this week, or on disability justice, or the website by the local artist Andy Slater advocating for digital accessibility for those with visual impairments. Our work, though, is still art as advocacy in the ways we are working with the disability community and using art as a vehicle for social change. In the, I'm going to say this incorrectly and I apologize, Stravapoulou article, some of you read this week, Reclaiming Safe Spaces, it argued arts-based research can transform displaced individuals' realities through facilitating cultural citizenship understood as one's right to resist marginalization, stigmatization, and misrecognition. That's from page 714. And this can be seen through some of our current grant goals for our project, which is to develop best practices for leading creative movement workshops for children and adults with disabilities, to advertise and create dance performances to expand connections within the disability community, demonstrate how dance can be used to increase physical and social emotional health through a collaborative creative movement process, explore how dance might be deployed as a tool to develop confidence and gain self-advocacy skills, and understand the capacity for interdependence to inform artistic practice. And people with disabilities are a marginalized community that face constant stereotypes reproduced through popular culture. Dr. Sandel went over some of those earlier in the video today. By focusing on work made from and by the community, acknowledging disability culture as essential for addressing misrecognition. So we're using disability culture to address this misrecognition. Our goals go beyond developing our own community, but doing outreach to address the stigmatization dancers with disabilities face, especially in a hyper-able dance world. Our fourth goal concerning increased confidence and the development of self-advocacy skills encourages the community to take a role in addressing this marginalization. Our experiences at performances and presentations of our film really speak to our dancers' willingness to own and share their creative contributions to dance. We are pleased to use art not only to be able to shine a light on the creative capacities of our dancers with disabilities in this way, but also their willingness to take ownership of the film and the role that they took in generating a movement piece. And I'm talking about a film that we made this past summer virtually at a distance together, which was called Shared Time. So there's one other quote that I really liked from that article. And in conclusion, Stravopoulou claimed an ethical and reflexive approach to arts-based research involves continuously interrogating the promised transformative potential and ensuring that participants' realities become enriched through their active involvement in the production of knowledge about their lives. We aim to ensure this by making work from a disability aesthetic with the community and through the lived experience of our community members as people with disabilities and their allies. This is done through closing circles each week and discussing the pedagogical processes used to make dances. What the community needs and desires changes by week, and as the founders, it's our responsibility to ensure we have reflexive teaching practice through frequent check-ins. With the success of our summer 2020 community film, Shared Time, we understand that making work annually as a community produces knowledge from the disability community. We see this work as producing knowledge about the experiences of being a person with a disability. This work then contributes to the disability aesthetic that Maggie was talking about earlier. We want to end with by posing you a few questions just for you to think about on your own. How did beginning with movement change your perception this evening? Did it alter how you listened or your connection to us as speakers? And how do you want to assist the community?
Beautiful. So while you think about those things, I have just a quick little bit to end with, but first I'm going to describe the lovely image of our dancers we have on the screen here. A group of dancers arranged in a circle in a large conference room. Some dancers sit in wheelchairs, others stand using chairs and tables for support. So essential to disability culture and to our practice as educators are the constant shifts that our bodies and art must make as new bodies enter and move with us. This constant flux may feel unwieldy and chaotic, but in fact is highly methodical and requires a deep sense of empathy and knowledge of the community to successfully and effectively implement. We invite all of you to consider the ways that you as students, teachers, community members can contribute and to participate in your community through arts-based work. And we have our contact info here, so please feel free to reach out to us with any questions. I'm going to stop sharing.
Can y'all see me? So I did want to lead with some of the comments that people asked to your questions. So someone said it helped ground me in the moment, made me aware of my own body. It made me realize the importance of taking a moment to recenter and refocus. Definitely made me get into the rhythm of engaging with what's on screen in front of me instead of passively letting it happen. It made me open my eyes and be more aware of my own body. And honestly, I feel the exact same way. I always love watching you two work together. I actually sent Maggie a private message and I was moving along and my cat's also interrupted, but I was moving along and I felt that was great. So before we get into questions, I actually did want to say the comment that you made about that this work is not for your dissertation. I thought that was amazing. I do want to also reiterate, all the work you do doesn't necessarily have to be for a dissertation or a thesis. Sometimes you can just want to make a change because you see a need for it, right? And you saw this need. And I remember, y'all going through the Schweitzer process. So sometimes you want to create work for change. And, I think that's great with the theme of today. Not all the art that people create is to sell, right? Not all art is made for that particular commodification of something. Sometimes it's made because it needs to facilitate change in any kind of process. So I really love that. I'm actually going to copy. There's still some more questions to copy, but the first question we got, few from the discussion board. So the first one was, what has been one of the most successful art advocacy tactics / tools you all have utilized to date, and how are you able to measure that success?
Hi, everybody, I'm back. Do you want to, why don't Sydney and Maggie start?
so
a lot about my film, so I just want to.
Yeah, so I was there were questions in the chat about the brain dance that I was really distracted by. Would you mind saying the question one more time, Washika? Sorry.
Oh, I'm sorry, no problem. And I can also put it in the chat because this wasn't a chat question, it was from the discussion board. So just give me a moment. What has been one of the most successful art advocacy tactics / tools you all have utilized to date, and how are you able to measure that success? I think this can also, for me, I feel like this can also go into the film as someone who makes films. How do you measure the success of, people's responses, their reflections, and what happens after they've seen the film? So I guess that could also look at a measurement of success. But like I said, I'm also going to put this in the chat. Give me a moment. So that's the question. I hope y'all can see it. I just copy pasted.
That's super helpful. Thank you. Yeah, I think, Sydney, I'll say something and then you can interrupt me if you disagree or have things to add. I think one of the things for me that's super essential to this work that we didn't get a chance to touch on, except for sort of demonstrating it for you, is that Sydney and I co-teach every class. And in that like helps us teach, but also is a super essential way of modeling the culture that we hope to build in the space, right? Like we're very honest with our community about like, I'm not feeling particularly well today, so Sydney is going to take this bit on, or like Sydney has an injury from dance, as most dancers do, and so often sits to dance, which works really well for me because I have a really hard time sitting and moving. So I will stand and model, right? So that sort of collective building of a space and modeling not only how we interact with one another, but how we would like our dancers to interact with one another and treat one another, and to like give space to one another is really important.
And I think that kind of builds out. So what Maggie's saying is that we model that, but then the community, now that we've been around for 2 years, is doing that for us. So Maggie and I have been very busy, and so dancers have volunteered to teach for us. So we're still there and we're still like co-modeling, but having someone take a lesson plan off your plate is huge. But then that also goes out even broader, I think, for our community in general. People will say, oh, hey, I'll check in on that dancer. And dancers actually then see our work, right? We'll present it at some places. And then now that we're virtual, we have dancers in Iowa, and another inclusive dance group at a disability organization in Detroit just contacted us. And so the big thing for us, though, is that art is advocacy, but only through the community. And so even when we're working with organizations here in Chicago, everyone does their little bit. And I think, Carrie, actually, you talk about this a little bit as the Chicago model, don't you?
Yeah, I do. And I think that relates to what I was sharing about wanting to make sure that the film had the feel of coming from the community, because when we had all those salons, we took note of the topics that people discussed. So we built also around what the community was wanting to say and really wanting to decenter individuals. So to answer the advocacy question, one of the things I've done that I think has had some of the most impact was a study with Dr. Carol Gill that Sydney cited. And it was on barriers and facilitators to arts careers for people with disabilities funded by the National Endowment for the Arts. And I was not a policy person. Definitely did not understand any of how this kind of research went, but I was brought in as co-PI, and we were able to then get information that policymakers would listen to, because then it came from a study, right? So sometimes you can leverage your position to make changes, like we can, Social Security Administration and vocational rehab made changes in some policy for artists. So that was really insightful, that there were different ways that I could work with artists with disabilities in different contexts.
Awesome. So the next question is, Carrie, can you share how your work has contributed to or been impacted by a shift from disability rights to disability justice? Have you seen a shift toward disability justice from disability rights within and or outside the disability community? This is a long one, sorry. In what ways have you used your work to develop, advance, or change health policy related to disability justice at the community, local, state, or federal levels? 1 second, and here I am copying this question. Okay, it worked.
Well, I'm gonna say some things about this, and then I will lob it over to Sydney and Maggie, because I think that they would have a lot to say on this as well. But in terms of disability rights, disability justice, one of the things that disability justice activists emphasize is that you can't accomplish everything through a rights-based framework, or some people feel like rights-based frameworks don't effectively work for intersectional, in terms of intersectionality. Sorry, I'm getting tired. So I just told you about a project that I did with Carol Gill in which we influenced policy, but those changes did not really solve all the problems. They were just like a little tiny tap, and people still experience all the barriers, and the needle is hardly moved. So I've found over the course of my career that focusing on disability culture, just like Sydney and Maggie talked about, starts to get attention. When I was knocking on the doors of museums and theaters and I demanded, access under the ADA, they could always find a way to get out of it. Like, there's a lot of loopholes in the law. But when we started to get attention was when we were making something that came from our experiences. And then all of a sudden people could do all these things they said they couldn't do before. So that's kind of how I've shifted in ways that I think align with the insights of disability justice activists. Sydney, Maggie?
I will say that I've already quoted you saying that exact thing in a meeting just today. I use that all the time. Yeah, I think again, Sydney, please feel free to interrupt. I think a lot of our thinking around the way we enact disability culture in our space traces a lineage from a lot of the thinking that comes out of disability justice, like our focus on collective access that is deeply rooted in disability justice, that comes from disability justice. We are at Access Living, so they are a more rights focused space, but our work really isn't about policy. It's about creating a liberatory space for disabled people to come together and to be in community with one another. And that feels more related to disability justice to me than to disability rights. Maybe, I don't know, that might, I also think sometimes the difference between the two is oversimplified. Yeah, what do you think, Sydney?
Yeah, I was just thinking about their last part of the question: in what ways have they used their work to develop and advance or change health policy and related to disability justice? And I mean, Maggie and I were at the Schweitzer Fellowship, which is health-based, right? Like, it's looking at the social determinants of health. Most people there are doctors, nurses, and then there's a few social workers. And then our year there was Maggie and I. That doesn't mean that Schweitzer doesn't position ideas about health as being varied and diverse. And I think that one of the ways that you realize that is that when you come to these spaces, you're not just saying, hey, this is a right. You know, you're saying, hey, this is a really complex topic. I mean, while we were there, there was a discussion about work in relation to an organization called Death with Dignity. And for Maggie and I, it was all a matter of really discussing, hey, this is a really complex topic in relation to the disability community. And these are some resources within the disability community that have specific disabled voices that this impacts. And I think it's important that these are also resources that we're looking at and that we're discussing. So that when you're going places, you're really thinking about giving a variety of perspectives, so that through that, you're not, I mean, we're not knocking on people's doors and specifically writing policy, but we are then providing the resources and ideas to people who are writing the policy.
Wow, I love that. I love the kind of nuance and complexity of the question, because it's not the easiest to answer too. So I did want to ask if you, because we're at 7, if you kind of wanted to stay and keep taking questions. We do have a couple more. And I wanted to ask the students if you were okay with skipping the break and just ending early. Like, we just take the questions and then we don't do discussion, we kind of end early, you know, kickstart your spring break a little early. But, you know, obviously we do want to ask everyone how they feel, you know, gauge how they're feeling emotionally, psychologically, how their energy levels are doing. Because it has been a gloomy-esque day, so you never know.
See a couple thumbs up from students. Is that all right with our panelists?
I can stay a little longer.
Awesome. Thank you all so much. So the next question is, Do you have any advice for people who don't see themselves as creatives or artists and, and not feeling intimidated? Put this in the chat. Was I on mute? I was not. Okay, good.
I guess I can start first. So it's kind of been challenging to me. I was an educator for many years, and when I was injured as a dancer, then I kind of left the dance world and I did stage management, and I always taught dance, but I didn't really think of myself as an artist or a creative. But I'm lucky enough to work under Dr. Sandal, who is an artist scholar and really talks about the fact that, right, like that artist portion can really be generative to your work, and it really can help you think through different theories and ideas. And so I'm going to say that art is a way that we can take pressure off, right? Like it doesn't have to be perfect, right? Like it's an exploration and it's fine. I know that I've gone to inclusive art sessions and I cannot draw, but whatever I make is fine. If that means that I cut together a bunch of things and put it like as a collage, then that's what I made. And it's still an expression of the moment that I'm in. And it's generative to me and it helps process what you're doing. So I would say that go in and do what you're doing, but don't come in with a clear mind, come in from a student's mind, right? Like as a way of just, I'm here to learn, and I'm here to be open, even when you're facilitating. And I think that that's what takes a lot of pressure off me when I go into spaces, especially when I'm not teaching and then suddenly I'm making work, then it helps take the pressure off.
Yeah, I totally agree with all of that. I think the value of a hobby is way underappreciated nowadays. And I will also just say that I sort of have a similar experience due to like disability and capitalism. I like had to take a lot of years away from dance. That's where my original training is. And actually, Sydney and I have found that our space has become a place for like quote unquote former dancers to gather. I think we have like maybe four different dancers who had 5 now, who had to like take time away because of injury, because of having to make dollars and get life insurance kind of stuff, or not life insurance. Geez, who can afford that? Medical insurance. Whoa. Yeah. So that, I think that's one of the exciting things about our workshop is that it's kind of become that space, and I think brought a lot of nuance to the ways that those dancers think about disability in dance, which is really exciting.
I think also to think about the material that you are probably already generating expansively as creative. One of the things that Maggie and Sydney and I do in the film class, and Washika too, this Torres was one of the teaching assistants in the class for a while, is have students do creative projects where they attempt to kind of take on some of the issues that we raise in the class. And a lot of the students are already making creative content through social media. So those can be memes, those can be, creating graphics, or our students, and I'm sure a lot of us are creating material, even if you can think of posts or Instagram images. Those are creative projects. And just to think about some of the stuff that you want to, you can make work just to express how you're feeling emotionally, but you can also use it to communicate political messages. We're seeing so many things coming from all the resources we have. When I was talking about Salome and Susan having started with the Empowered Fifis and putting the means of production in the hands of the girls, that was because at that time they didn't have social media. So they were teaching the girls to use these big cameras. But now, I mean, people have so much more access. So I guess think about what you're already doing as creative and kind of let yourself, expand and think of it in that way. Maybe that will help like propagate the work.
So we do have a bit of a bombshell question. And it was, what were your thoughts on the Sia music movie? I know I didn't see it. I wasn't going to see it. But, as creatives, as people in the arts world, how did you, what did you think? What were your thoughts? It's in the chat now.
We kind of checked in on this one before. Who wants to start off? All right, well, I'm going to just start by saying I have not watched the movie because I've read all the controversies around it. I've been posting them all to our Code of the Freaks Facebook page. And so what I've been doing is listening to the voices of autistic people, autistic advocates who are just coming up with so many critiques of the film. I think that, by not including autistic people in the film at all, I mean, the storyline is kind of ludicrous, and the way that autism is portrayed and used as a narrative device is just deplorable. But that started with the writing. So there's, not hiring a disabled or autistic actor to play a main character. But if you have a story that, they could have hired an autistic actor and it still would have sucked because the story sucked. For me, among all of the criticism that I've read, the one that is most distressing is the one about the portrayal of a prone restraint. It's when someone is put on their stomach and held down, basically. And this happens to the autistic character in the movie, and during it, it's joked about. It's seen as something that works without any context at all about how dangerous and how horrifying this kind of restraint is. And so I do know that Sia then, first she was like rejecting and denying all of this criticism, but then she did provide some funding for a group of non-speaking autistic people to create a short film in rebuttal that kind of sets the record straight on these issues. I can't remember what it's called. If anybody knows the link, put it in the chat. But I've watched it and I think it was interesting as a way to even attempt to repair some of the harm that film has made. I don't know, Sydney and Maggie, we want to chime in? I just couldn't watch it.
I think you did a great job, Carrie. I also chose not to watch it, and that is the choice. And so since I made that choice, I also cannot speak to the film more than Carrie has said and what is also out there. I do think it's important to look at some of the really cool work that is being made by artists with autism. And Sia said that there wasn't actors, but I just also want to highlight that there was a film that came out during the pandemic. It was a series on, I don't remember which streaming series it's on, but it's called Little Voice. And the brother in the film is an actor with autism. And so there are artists out there that, could have been included in the film and the process, and dancers. And so it's just important that we think about lifting their voices and their work right now.
Yeah, and I also just want to point out that the movie has also been criticized for its use of blackface. At one point, Maddie Ziegler, who plays the main character, is in she wears I guess they're supposed to be ear defenders. They look like headphones, but she wears headphones made of braids, like black braids, and is like heavily like it's not okay. It's pretty obvious. So I just want to point that out as well, that it's this film is being criticized from multiple angles. Yeah, all of which inform one another, of course.
I think one day I'll have to break down and actually watch it, because as a film and performance scholar, I tend to try not to critique things that I haven't watched, just because it's the way I was trained. But I'm just waiting for a time when I can brace myself, because these films just come out regularly over and over, and it's triggering. You know, it's very triggering, because you know, it's like, do we have to watch this again? So I think sometimes you have to take care of yourself and choose not to watch some of this stuff. But I do think I'm going to have to break it down, and then I will watch it so you don't have to.
Yeah, I've been doing that too. I've definitely been listening to critiques from various voices in different communities about don't watch this or not to watch that because of the traumas, and I don't want to support that or reinforce that in any way. So we have 2 more questions. So it says, would you be willing to say a little bit more about how you conceptualize CRIP versus and disability, particularly in the context of like the film's name, and your methods and lenses in making it? So this is more directed to Dr. Sandel, of course, but.
Sure. I'll try to keep it brief. So the term CRIP is one that, you know, obviously comes from the word cripple, which was a term that has been used to belittle and bully disabled people. But it also used to be kind of actually was a diagnosis and described us. So like when I was a child, I spent time in the Crippled Children's Hospital. I was always described as crippled. So I have a complicated relationship to that term. But people with different impairments have kind of come together and reclaimed that term. And the reason why that term is so powerful is because it's been used, you know, as such a powerful force coming at us. So it's kind of like, you know, flipping it back. It is not one that our strategy that everybody who has a disability or identifies as disabled finds useful or acceptable. The reason why we chose it is because it was our perspective. We are part of being CRIP is being on the outside, agitating from the outside. It's not just about asking to be mainstreamed. It's not just about asking to be included on the oppressor's terms. It's about being that edge. It's about like us not acquiescing to what the documentary film company wanted us to do. It's about, you know, one of the most CRIP decisions we made was not having the camera focus on signs of people's impairments. So we do get questions about, well, what is so-and-so's disability? Which we hope people then will reflect on, like, oh, I wonder why I'm just like so fixated on what it is. But a lot of us have had the experience of having a camera zoom in on our orthotics or on our wheelchair without showing our faces, or following us from behind in media stories. So by choosing to show everybody in the same frame, right, we're not satisfying the expectation that we know is there. So there's a lot of little choices we made like that, because we wanted to harness the fact that this was a movie that has an edge. We don't have like say, oh, things are so much better now. Like we're kind of, and also it describes our sense of humor. There's a lot of snark. Snark is probably the strategy of the movie, where they're like wicked takedowns of these movies. I think that was our choice to use a term that would signal that we were not, that this wasn't going to be a necessarily a feel-good experience. It was going to cause people to have discussions, but it wasn't going to, be the same movie. Right? It's purposely not the same movie as the other movie. So I don't know, like Maggie and Sydney, would you consider the inclusive dance companies CRIP in any way? Or do CRIP approaches influence your pedagogical techniques or approach?
I mean, Maggie actually cut the part about CRIP out of the presentation for today, didn't you?
I just was worried. We cite Carrie talking about your timeout idea and disability aesthetics. So talking about how we disabled folks need space to, on our own, figure out what disability aesthetics are. So it's not really about cripping necessarily. I guess you use like the idea of crip space time in that work. But it was just for time's sake. We were just running behind. And I figured they'd already heard from Carrie. So yeah, I mean, I think I like crip as a verb, as a to crip a thing, right? As it's a thing we bring into being in the space, and that feels really relevant to the work we're doing, right? That we're actively bringing in this, bringing into being this aesthetic, this and this community, and in many ways that feels like sort of cripping what dance is or might be. Yeah.
And now that you're saying that, Maggie, I do think that maybe the ways that sometimes we come, Maggie and I are on a lot of national talks about disability in dance. And I think because we study under Dr. Sandel, we kind of really resist ideas of codification and all of this. And I think it also is because of what Maggie says, we work in a cross-disability space and we want to keep it that way. And we want to keep it disability centered. And that means that we're not looking for able-bodied norms. We're not looking for dance norms. We're not even looking for the disabled dance norms that are in the inclusive dance community. That's not what we're interested in. It's been done, they make it, and that's fine. But we're interested in what our community makes and the interesting ways that they then move. And I think that kind of goes into the next question that you're going to directly bring up, Ms. Torres.
My thing keeps freezing. Not sure if you can all hear me.
We can hear you.
Okay, because I can't
and
see.
You have a thought. You have a thoughtful face. It looks like you're thinking. So
I'm thinking about why this isn't working properly. But I can ask the question and when I get a chance, put in the chat. So yeah, can you say more about how the production of art produces knowledge, and what do you mean by knowledge in that context?
Yeah, so I think that kind of goes into what I was just saying, right? In art, especially in dance and also in theater and film, we're specifically looking at the body, and it's other people looking at the body and the ways that the bodies are interacting with one another. And so that interaction in itself is producing knowledge. It's not only producing knowledge about the ways bodies interact, but it's also producing knowledge and perhaps addressing some of the stereotypes and ways that people have these ingrained ideas about those bodies, right? Like, what is it? There's a big, Bill T. Jones is a dancer and a choreographer, and back in the 90s, he had a very diverse dance company. And Maggie, you're probably going to do a better job about speaking this to me, based on sizes and heights. And he's done controversial or work that was seen as controversial at the time. But what does it mean then to see a dancer on stage who is 80 years old, or a dancer who on stage who is 300 pounds, or a dancer on stage? All of this then confronts your ideas that have been put into our body, right, and our mind about who should be dancing, who should be on stage, who is able to produce images about people, and is allowed to do that. And I think that kind of also goes into whiteness. I know that's kind of a discussion that's been happening in the dance community right now, right? Like a lot of the discussion of the bodies and knowledge production stems from a white perspective and colonialist perspectives, really, right? Like these colonialist perspectives that then built this canon and kind of erasing the different ways that communities were influencing that these white choreographers. And I don't know if Carrie wants or Maggie want to add on that a little bit.
I thought those are really great examples and explanations. To add to it, one of the things I've been thinking about a lot is how the process of the ways in which we make art. So all the stuff that Maggie and Cindy were talking about, making new work, we can use as a model for how we want our communities to engage, right? So this is something that Maggie and Cindy and I have talked about a lot, is that when you just include disabled people into mainstream structures, those structures stay intact. And they're never really going to work for disabled people. You know, it's always an approximation of what's intended for non-disabled people. But so when we move into these disability-centric spaces, we have the opportunity to try out ideas, to like the idea of collective access. And Maggie and Cindy, what does that look like literally? What does it look like when groups of people create access for each other? How might that be different than the standard checklist of, you know, audio description, ASL? You know, we have a checklist, but a lot of the things that you all are doing are not on a checklist, right? But are necessary so that people can participate. These are the things we discover when we have time in the space to explore our body, minds, and our communities. And this was something that Maggie alluded to earlier. Yeah, so that's knowledge. Like what a community can be is a form of knowledge. It's also a form of imagination. And, all those things. I could go on. You know, we get really excited about these ideas and love to share them.
Yeah, I was just thinking this this question is like maybe discovered the hill I will die on. Like, yeah, so the hill I will die on is that all knowledge is produced through the body, that that the body is essential to understanding, perceiving, being in relationship to the world around us. And coming back to the idea of crip, an idea that I super love is crip wisdom. And it's this idea, it comes from Sins Invalid, again, talking about disability justice. That's where it is, right? That's where it sort of emerges out of. Crip wisdom is this idea that disabled or crip bodies hold these wisdoms specifically because of our experiences of the world, because of our bodily experiences of the world, right? That we know things about the way the world works and about the way bodies work and about the way that our bodies work that we would not know were we not disabled, right? And that those knowledges are powerful. And I think one of the sort of foundational aspects of all of the work that we've talked about today is bringing that into being and making it legible, right? And really valuing those knowledges. Yeah.
Yeah, this is also great. And I just want to thank you all again for giving us your time and wisdom and insight and experiences tonight. I think Ms. Torres was having internet issues, so I'll send you all off. Thank you again for joining us. And for our students, I hope you have a lovely spring break and restful to some degree as much as you can. So thank you. Have a great Friday and a weekend and a spring break.
Thanks, y'all.
Thank you.
Thanks.